This is the story of an ordinary 13-year-old girl who, like lots of teenagers, kept a diary.
I hope I'll be able to confide everything to you, as I've never been able to confide in anyone. And I hope you'll be a great source of comfort and support.
But in the weeks after she started writing her diary, the author's life completely changed. She went from being a normal teenager into a life in hiding, away from the people who wanted to murder her family. The girl's name is Anne Frank. Anne Frank is one of the most famous writers and diarists the world has ever seen. Her book has sold millions of copies worldwide. Anne's diary covers 2 years during World War II, when her and her family had to go into hiding from the Nazis. But whilst Anne is famous for her life here in the Netherlands, she was born in Frankfurt, Germany. Anne was the youngest child of Mum Edith, Dad Otto, and was sister to Margot. The Franks were proud Germans and Jews. In 1933, when Anne was just 3, Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany, and his party, the Nazis, told Germans that Jews were the enemies of the people. So the Franks, like thousands of other German Jews, made the decision that they needed to get out of the country. For their new home, they chose Amsterdam, where they thought they'd be safe. The Franks moved to this apartment block in an area called Moederplan, just a few minutes away from the centre of Amsterdam. And from that window in 1941, the only existing film of Anne was taken. Anne was captured on film as she leant out of a window to peer down below at the wedding of their next-door neighbours. To find out more about Anne, I'm going to meet someone who knew her. Eva Schloss was part of a Jewish family who, like the Franks, fled to the safety of the Netherlands. They ended up living just a few metres away from the Franks' apartment. Eva now lives in London.
One day a little girl came and introduced herself, said her name was Anne Frank. We were both 11 years old at the time, and we became friends. She was very sure of herself, big chatterbox. At school, she was always told not to talk so much. She was called Mrs. Quack Quack. Very often she had to stay behind and write 100 lines. I'm not going to talk so much in school, but she just did again.
In June 1942, Anne celebrated her 13th birthday. Anne's dad, Otto, took her out to choose her own birthday present. Anne picked a diary.
Writing in a diary is a really strange experience. Not only because I've never written anything before, but also because it seems to me that I, nor anybody else, will be interested in the musings of a 13-year-old schoolgirl. Paper has more patience than people. I thought of this saying on one of those days when I was feeling a little depressed and wondered whether to stay in or go out. Yes, paper does have more patience. And since I'm not planning to let anyone else read this, it probably won't make a bit of difference. I don't want to jot down facts in this diary the way most people would do. But I want the diary to be my friend, and I'm going to call this friend Kitty.
At first, Anne's diary detailed her everyday life. She wrote about friends, her worries about school, normal topics for a teenage girl's diary. But after just a few entries, all of that was about to change. As part of World War II, Nazi Germany had invaded the Netherlands, and the Nazis set about making life difficult for the country's Jewish residents. By 1942, when Anne received her diary, the Nazis had begun sending some Dutch Jews from their homes to concentration camps, where they'd face horrendous conditions or death. Just weeks after Anne started writing her diary, her family received one of these. It was a call-up notice from the Nazis for Anne's sister, Margot. It told the Franks that Margot should report to them ready to be sent to a work camp somewhere in Germany. Eva's family received a call-up notice at the same time as the Franks.
Heinz, my brother, and Anne's sister Margot, they were only 16. They were going to be deported to Germany to work in German factories. Where the Dutch people hadn't experienced the hatred of the Germans to Jews, so many of them sent their children. And of course they never went to Germany. They were sent to Mauthausen, which was an Austrian death camp, and those children were never ever seen again. And that was the time when my father called us together and he said, "We are not sending Heinz, but we are going into hiding."
Anne's dad, Otto, decided that now was the time to put into action a secret plan he'd been working on. The Franks were also going into hiding. Anne and her sister Margot were told to put on as many layers of clothes as they could manage. Carrying a suitcase would cause suspicion.
We're wrapped in so many layers of clothes, it looks as if we're going to spend the night in a refrigerator.
They were allowed to take with them just one small bag. Anne filled hers with her most valued possessions.
This diary, curlers, handkerchiefs, school books, and some letters. I've stuck the craziest things in the bag, but I'm not sorry. Memories mean more to me than dresses. Morcha, my cat, is the only living creature I'm saying goodbye to.
The family made their way here to this building in the centre of Amsterdam. It was home to Otto's business. The Franks climbed this staircase, probably not realising they'd seen the outside world for the last time in years. The stairs led to a set of rooms above Otto's warehouse that he'd been secretly furnishing, creating a small annex flat, concealed from the outside world. With the entrance hidden by this bookcase, the secret annex would go on to be their hiding place for the next 2 years.
It seems like years since Sunday morning. So much has happened. It's as if the whole world has suddenly turned upside down. But as you can see, I'm still alive, and that's the main thing. Only when we were walking down the street did Father and Mother reveal what the plan was. For months we'd been moving as much of our furniture out of the apartment as we could. It was agreed that we go into hiding on July the 16th. Because of Margot's call-up notice, the plan had to be moved up 10 days. All day long we unpacked boxes, filled cupboards, hammered nails and straightened up the mess until we fell exhausted into our clean beds at night. I didn't have a chance to think about the enormous change in my life.
For the next few days, Anne worked busily to try and make the annex more like a home.
I don't think I'll ever feel at home in this house, but that doesn't mean I hate it. The annex is an ideal place to hide in. Thanks to Father, who brought my entire postcard and movie star collections here beforehand, I'm able to plaster the walls with pictures. We've already canned loads of rhubarb, strawberries and cherries. We also have a supply of reading material. So for the time being, I doubt we'll be bored. Of course, we can't ever look out the window or go outside. And we have to be quiet so that the people downstairs can't hear us.
To avoid discovery by workers in the warehouse below, during business hours, flushing the toilet and running water was banned, and walking around was to be kept to a minimum. Anne had to keep herself occupied with schoolwork, reading, and of course, her diary. Those in the annex did have some support in the shape of 4 of Otto Frank's most trusted employees, who visited daily to bring in food and supplies. as well as news of the outside world. The helpers did so even though they knew they risked death if they were caught helping Jews in hiding. Eva went into hiding at about the same time as Anne. For her, any novelty that came with her new life was short-lived.
When we went into hiding, my father said it won't be long, probably just Christmas. But it dragged on and dragged on and dragged on. And I was very, very infuriated because I was active and I missed my friends and I missed my family, and we got very, very depressed and anxious.
For Anne, as weeks in the annex turned into months, the difficult reality of a life in hiding began to set in.
I'm doing fine, except I've got no appetite. My nerves often get the better of me, especially on a Sunday. That's when I really feel miserable. Outside, you don't hear a single bird, and a deathly oppressive silence hangs over the house. I feel like a songbird whose wings have been ripped off.
The Franks weren't the only ones who hid in the annex. Family friends, the Van Pels, together with their teenage son, Peter, joined the 4 Franks. Anne decided to write using code names, so the Van Pels became the Van Dans. Even with the 3 new arrivals, the annex was large enough for Anne to have her own small room. But after just a few months, an 8th person joined the annex. Anne would have to share her space. Her new roommate was 53-year-old dentist Fritz Pfeffer, who Anne codenamed Mr. Dussel, which in Dutch means Mr. Idiot.
We've been using too much electricity and have now exceeded our ration. The results? No lights for 14 days. That's a pleasant thought, isn't it? But there's more bad news. Mr. Dussel, the man who was said to get along so well with children, has turned out to be an old-fashioned disciplinarian and preacher of unbearably long sermons on manners. Since I have the singular pleasure of sharing my far too narrow room with His Excellency, and since I'm generally considered to be the worst behaved of the 3 young people, it's all I can do to avoid having the same old scoldings repeatedly flung at my head and pretend not to hear. This wouldn't be so bad if Mr. Dussel weren't such a tattletale and hadn't singled out Mother to be the recipient of his reports. It's not easy being the badly brought up centre of attention of a family of nitpickers.
As well as adapting to her new life inside the annex, events outside of the hiding place were never far from Anne's thoughts.
Mannen en vrouwen van Nederland.
Those in the annex had a radio which brought them news of the war and of the fates of Jews captured by the Nazis. Eva also had a radio in her hiding place.
The people where we were staying, who hated the Nazis, always had a little radio at that time, hidden somewhere. And at 9 o'clock we were glued to the news. They told about the 300 concentration and death camps in Germany and Poland, so we knew what was going on.
The dangers of being discovered and captured by the Nazis were brought home to Anne one day in July 1943, when Amsterdam faced heavy bombing by the Allies.
Yesterday was a very tumultuous day, and we're still all wound up. The first warning siren went off at breakfast, but we paid no attention because it only meant that the planes were crossing the coast. At 2:30, Margot had finished her office work and was just gathering her things together when the sirens began wailing again. Anne, get down! I know we can't leave here, but if we had to, being seen on the streets would be just as dangerous as getting caught in an air raid.
Away from the freedoms of her old life and having to share such a small space with so many other people, Anne's relationships with those around her began to strain. Anne wrote that her mum, Edith, was a source of particular irritation.
I don't care what you say. Why don't you just wash your hands off me? I'm a hopeless case. I'm seething with rage. I'd like to scream, stamp my foot, give Mother a good shaking, cry and I don't know what else because of her nasty words, mocking looks and accusations that she hurls at me day after day. I'd like to scream at Mother, Margot, the Van Dans, Dussel and Father too. Leave me alone. Let me have at least one night when I don't cry myself to sleep with my eyes burning and my head pounding. Let me get away. Away from everything. Away from this world. But I can't do that. I can't let them see my doubts or the wounds they've inflicted on me. I couldn't bear their sympathy. It would only make me want to scream even more. All day long I hear nothing but what an exasperating child I am. And although I laugh it off and pretend not to mind, I do mind. I wish I could ask God to give me another personality. One that doesn't antagonise everyone.
Anne desperately needed a friend and someone she could confide in. Anne turned her attention to the Van Dans' teenage son, Peter. But at first, for Anne, Peter was a source of amusement rather than of romance.
Peter, though he's usually quiet, occasionally gives rise to hilarity. He has the misfortune of adoring foreign words without knowing what they mean. One afternoon, we couldn't use the toilet because there were visitors in the office. Unable to wait, he went to the bathroom but didn't flush the toilet. To warn us of the unpleasant odour, he tacked a sign to the bathroom door. RSVP, gas. Of course he meant danger gas, but he thought RSVP looked more elegant. He didn't have the faintest idea that it meant please reply.
As Anne entered her second year of hiding in the annex, she began to look upon Peter differently.
Dearest Kitty, my longing for someone to talk to has become so unbearable that I somehow took it into my head to select Peter for this role. Peter is currently going through a crossword puzzle craze, and he doesn't do anything else all day. I was helping him, and we soon wound up sitting across from each other. It gave me a wonderful feeling when I looked into his dark blue eyes. I could read his innermost thoughts, and in his face I saw a look of helplessness and uncertainty as to how to behave, and at the same time, a flicker of awareness of his masculinity. I saw his shyness, and I melted.
Smile.
Why do you always want me to smile?
Because you get dimples in your cheeks. How do you do that?
I was born with them. They're the only mark of beauty I possess.
No, that's not true.
Yes, it is. I know I'm not beautiful. I never have been and I never will be.
I don't agree. I think you're pretty.
I am not.
I say you are. And you'll have to take my word for it.
You mustn't think I'm in love with Peter, because I'm not. If the Van Dans had had a daughter instead of a son, I'd have tried to make friends with her.
Whilst Anne had made a connection with Peter, the threat of discovery hadn't gone away. The Nazis were determined to hunt down every Jew in hiding. Anne's old friend, Eva, hid in the house of a non-Jewish family and faced regular searches.
So the Nazis came always at night, knocked on doors. People had to open the doors and let them in and search their homes. So the people from the resistance looked over the apartment and made a hiding place. So at night when we heard the knock, we quickly go into this hiding place, hoping they wouldn't find us. You know, we didn't dare to sleep, and we heard, for instance, a rumor in another place they felt the beds and they were still warm, so they demolished the whole apartment till they found the people. And then the owners of the apartment were taken away as well.
Because Anne and the others hid above a warehouse, they didn't face regular searches. But one weekend, following a failed burglary downstairs, those in the annex were forced to lay low, fearing that police would come to investigate, potentially discovering their hiding place.
My head's in a whirl. I really don't know where to begin. It was 10:30, then 11. Not a sound. Then at 11:15, a noise below. What was that?
Shh.
You could hear the whole family breathing. No one moved a muscle. Footsteps in the house, the private office, then on the staircase. All sounds of breathing stopped. Hearts pounded. We're done for. We were out of danger. So far. A shiver went through everyone's body. No one said a word. We've been strongly reminded of the fact that we're Jews in chains, chained to one spot without any rights, but with 1,000 obligations.
The annex was safe for now. By summer 1944, the war was progressing and Nazi Germany had suffered military defeats. Allied troops were preparing to invade Central Europe to set free countries like the Netherlands that were under Nazi control. Those in the secret annex began to dream of a life beyond their captivity.
Here is a special bulletin read by John Snag.
This is D-Day.
Early this morning, the Allies began the assault on the northwestern face of Hitler's European fortress.
Is this really the beginning of the long-awaited liberation? The liberation we've all talked so much about, which still seems too good, too much of a fairy tale to ever come true. Will this year, 1944, bring us victory? We don't know yet. But where there's hope, there's life. It fills us with fresh courage and makes us strong again. Maybe, Margot says, I can go back to school in October or September. I'll keep you informed of the latest news.
Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened.
Just a few weeks after the optimism of D-Day came the day Anne was living in fear of. The annex had been discovered. Nobody knows how the Nazis found out about the annex, but officers stormed the staircase and arrested all of those inside. They were taken away and made to leave behind their belongings and Anne's diary. They were imprisoned in the Netherlands, but after a few weeks, the Franks were bundled into a windowless compartment of a cattle train headed to Poland. Like Anne, Eva Schloss's hiding place was discovered in 1944, and she too was taken on a train to Poland.
So a terrible, terrible, terrible journey. Like a container, really. Big sliding door in the middle, and about 60, 70 people were pushed in there. There were 2 buckets they gave us, one with clean water, the other one for using as toilets. And once a day, the doors were slit open and big chunks of bread were thrown in, like you would feed animals. There was not enough water, not enough food, and the bucket for toilets with 70 people was, of course, overrunning.
After 3 nights, Anne's train arrived here at the Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp. Auschwitz historian Agnieszka is explaining what happened to Anne when she arrived at the camp.
On that train were 1,019 people traveling. So platform was full of people. People were looking for relatives. Dogs were barking. Probably she heard some shouting guards. And then finally, selection began.
The Nazis ran selections to decide which people they'd admit to the camp to work and those who they'd kill straight away. Because the Franks had been in hiding for so much of the war, they were in decent health, and all 4 were admitted to work in the camp. Anne's dad, Otto, was separated from his wife and girls and sent to a different part of the camp. It'd be the very last time he'd ever see them. Agnieszka is showing me the kind of living conditions that Anne would have entered into.
Right now we are in a wooden hut. Anne and her sister probably stayed in such sort of buildings. Try to imagine 400 prisoners locked up in here. The building was overcrowded. No ventilation, so we can imagine smell in here. Prisoners could not wash themselves properly, and they were so dirty, sometimes they could not recognize themselves.
In conditions like these, disease spread easily amongst prisoners. To show me how poor facilities were, we've come to the toilet block.
Prisoners use such facilities twice a day, mornings and evenings. You can see no privacy, no dignity. They didn't have soap. They had just cold, dirty water. She shared this kind of place with many, many other prisoners. So I think it was extremely difficult for her to deal with such situation.
having to live in such terrible conditions meant that the health of Anne and Margot deteriorated. As the Frank sisters were getting weaker, British, Russian and American soldiers were freeing land that had been taken by the Germans. With soldiers just weeks away from liberating Auschwitz, the Nazis attempted to cover up their terrible war crimes. They demolished buildings and sent prisoners to other camps. Anne and Margot were forced to leave their mother and were sent on a cattle train to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, where they faced a cruel winter. In early 1945, frail from their time in concentration camps and broken by the harsh winter, the pair caught a disease called typhus. It proved to be deadly. Margot and Anne died just days apart. Of the 8 people who hid in the secret annex, just one, Anne's dad Otto, survived the concentration camps. After the war, he returned to Amsterdam, where he collected Anne's diaries that had been kept safe by one of his employees. In it, he saw an entry that Anne wrote just months before the annex was discovered.
I always used to bemoan the fact that I couldn't draw, but now I'm overjoyed that at least I can write. And if I don't have the talent to write books or newspaper articles, I could always write for myself. But I want to achieve more than that. I want to be useful, or bring enjoyment to all people, even those I've never met. I want to go on living, even after my death. Will I ever be able to write something great? Will I ever be able to become a journalist, or a writer?
Anne's wish was granted. Her diaries were published and have been read all over the world. The book became a symbol of the horrors of what can happen when people discriminate against others, but also of Anne's resolve in the most desperate of circumstances. Because of her diary, Anne is the most well-known victim of the Holocaust. But through her words, we don't just remember Anne's life, but the lives of the 1.5 million children murdered during the Holocaust.